like to welcome our listeners to the Boulos Beat podcast. I'm your guest host, Nate Stevens, partner at the Boulos Company. The Boulos Company is Northern New England's largest commercial real estate firm with offices in Portland, Maine and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We've been selling and leasing real estate in Maine and New Hampshire since 1975. This is a series providing insight into Maine's real estate movers, shakers, and business leaders. And speaking of business leaders, we have two very special guests with us today. And we're going to do a couple firsts on the Boulos Beat, the first of which we have two guests for the first time. And the first, I'd like to welcome Ellen Belknap, president of SMRT Architects and Engineers, 150-year-old company, started and still based here in Portland. Ellen was born and raised in New York City and received her undergraduate degree from Cornell University and attended Columbia University, where she received her master's in architecture, planning, and preservation. She joined SMRT in 1986 as an intern, or maybe it was a couple of years before that as an intern, and becoming president of the company in 2004. Ellen was listed as a Maine Biz Women to Watch, and she resides in Portland as well as spends time on Cliff Island. So Ellen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Our other guest today, and also a first for Boulos Beat, is Paul Stevens. And if you haven't guessed it, my father, our first father-son interview duo here on the Boulos Beat. So Paul was born and raised in Portland and Cape Elizabeth areas, left to study at Wesleyan University, and then attended the University of Pennsylvania, where he received his Master's of Architecture degree. Paul joined the family firm, then Stevens Architects, in 1966, and has worn many hats, as Ellen did, throughout his history at the company since. I think actually maybe you were even doing tasks as a child in the office you've told me about as well. So
Age 15.
Age
yes. 15,
yes. Yeah, a little different nowadays. I don't think I did that at 15. Paul still resides in Portland and Cape Elizabeth and spends time on Little Diamond Island in the summers. I think between the two of you, we have a lot of Casco Bay Islands represented today. Right. So we've got it covered. So it's an honor having you both here. Thank you for joining. So, Ellen, I thought we could start by introducing our viewers to SMRT. I'm wondering if you could provide a quick overview of the company and some notable projects.
Good, sure, thank you. Nice to be here. SMRT is an architecture engineering firm, and we solve complex problems. We thrive on a client who can't figure out what to do about something, and we can bring our team together and understand what they need and how to help them hit the mark. And that could be an education project, it could be a justice project, it could be a county jail, it could be a hospital, it could be a corporate office. Those are the major markets that we play in, and it's really across the Northeast and beyond. Some notable projects familiar to many of you: the Augusta new hospital for Maine General we completed. That was a signature project for the firm. The Cumberland County Jail was a signature justice project for us. In the education sector, we are leading the University of Maine Student Success Center right now, University of Southern Maine in Portland, their Student Success Center and Residence Hall.
Well, I think going back, early, maybe earlier, a lot earlier in my career, I think the Casco Bay Ferry Terminal was kind of a major piece in the growth of the company, and we actually won a competition to get that job. One of my favorite projects, which is not all that old, but it gets old fast, but is the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, which is one of my favorite buildings that we did. So,
And then on the corporate office side, we recently did all of the interiors for the new WEX campus. So.
Yeah, a lot of interior architecture projects recently I've seen. So maybe you could rewind the clock a little bit farther back in terms of the history of SMRT, a very old company founded here in Portland. What is the kind of quick history of
really
SMRT?
quick, the company was founded by my great-grandfather and your great-great-grandfather, John Calvin Stevens, back in 1884. And in the early part of the next century, he was joined by his son, John Howard Stevens, and they practiced together until my great-grandfather's death in the early 40s. And then my father, John Calvin Stevens II, joined the firm in the early 30s and was active really about until the time that I took over the company, which was probably in 1973, I believe. So, so a long history with a lot of important buildings in the city.
Right. And what brought you back to Portland? I mean, did you have a plan to kind of join the family firm, or was it just serendipitous to end up back in Portland?
It was one of those random things. My dad had a big school project, and there were not a lot of people in the office that day, maybe 4 or 5 people in the office. And so I was working in Philadelphia at the time. And so I said I would come back and help him with the project, but he needed to know that when we were done with the project, I was going back to Philadelphia. Never did.
Never went back. Yeah, and 50 years later,
well,
you still are.
And part of the reason was that I met your mother.
Sure, that can complicate things. And so, Ellen, you joined in 1986.
I joined in 86, having done a couple of summers, 83, 84, 85 within the firm.
Yep.
So I think my first summer, you were probably 3 years old, and I remember you falling down the stairs at the office.
I don't remember that, but
Yeah.
I've been told it was a big fall. Yeah, the space above Nosh, right?
Exactly, space above Nosh, 73 Oak Street. That's where we were.
Historical
and
monument,
when I joined the firm, we had 7 or 8 people,
Wow.
and now we have 120.
So what brought you back or to Portland in the first place? Did you have any previous experience or visiting Maine?
So I did grow up spending the summers on Cliff Island.
Yep.
And so it was summer. I was in school. What do you do in the summer? You go to Maine.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to find a summer internship in architecture, so I went knocking on some doors in Portland and bumped into Paul. And I said, well, I've got to catch the boat at 5:30. And so we talked, and I think Paul gave me a ride to the boat.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Recruitment
I
at
think
its
that's
best.
right. I forgot about that.
So when you started at SMRT, obviously I think this was your first real job outside of school. Did you always have a leadership role in mind growing throughout the company? I mean, this was the 80s when things were a little different back then. And as a woman in leadership position now is becoming more typical. Was that something that you strive to do in your career at SMRT?
I think I grew into it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I started by doing projects and practicing my craft.
Right.
And there's leadership that's involved at the project level. There's leadership that's involved at managing the client level. And then there's leadership involved in positioning the firm
Mm-hmm.
and leading the firm. So I think, I didn't start out leading the firm. I started out leading projects. And then it was more organic.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, this is a real estate podcast. We should probably look at the real estate story of SMRT. And I know we've talked a little bit about this in the past, about the various locations that SMRT has been in over time. And when you joined the firm, there were 7 to 8 people and a couple thousand square feet on Congress Street. But, how did your office space story kind of evolve over time with growth of the company, obviously? But it's amazing that a company can be in the same city within several blocks of each other for so long. Was that intentional, or what's kind of the emphasis behind that?
I think it was primarily intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And I just went back and looked when I was sort of thinking about this, but since I joined the company, we've been in 9 locations.
Wow.
And the last one, we were there 25 years. So there were a lot of fairly short-term places that we were, and it's partly because of growth.
Yeah.
As you grow, you keep needing more space. And you mentioned Oak Street, the Oak Street Congress Street address. And when we went in there, we were growing, and we ended up, that was an abandoned space, and it's now a really expensive condominium. But we did a lot of hands-on work to improve that space just so we could move into it. But it was vacant space when we got there.
Yeah. I always like working with clients because you look at a vacant, empty space and can visualize what it could be. Whereas sometimes my job is to paint that picture, but I don't necessarily need to do that when working with architects, which is nice. And so then after Oak Street, you moved to 39 Forest Avenue, correct?
We did.
And what was the story behind that move?
The story behind that move, and it was actually a fair exchange that we did, real estate exchange that we did for that. And there was a company at 39 Forest Avenue that was looking to build a new plant. I think they were a printing company of some sort.
Right.
And we built them a new facility out in Riverside.
1000 Riverside.
Right.
Yeah.
And we traded that building after we built it for the real estate on 39 Forest Avenue, which was way more space than we needed. we were in over our heads as real estate owners, and
Just because of the size of the building?
well, it was the size of the building, and when I think this was early 90s, when the real estate here in town was in the tank, and we tried to re-up some of the leases that we had, and we lost a really major tenant, which means that we were trying to pay the mortgage on a at least half empty building. And that was a recipe for disaster. That was what led us to leave there and go to 144 4th Street. And it also, that move was what enabled Ellen to join the company as an owner, because she was looking at a small group of people in senior positions who owned that real estate, and understanding that the loan was upside down, and there was no way a younger person wanted to join a company that was in the tank on a real estate deal. And we asked her to join as a partner, and she basically said no the first time around.
So in that case, owning the real estate was a hindrance to the growth of the company?
It definitely was.
Yeah. And playing landlord was a distraction from,
absolutely.
the goal of the
Business.
company actually is.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. What kind of lessons were learned there for other companies that are, looking at possibly owning versus leasing real estate?
Well, I think having a few senior people closely hold the real estate in the company can be a recipe for disaster. I know a couple of other companies that have had similar situations to ours and maybe didn't end up in such dire straits. But junior people who didn't own the real estate, had a feeling that the owners of the real estate were overcharging on rent, and it created a division within the company. And at least the one firm that I'm thinking about, they basically ended up bailing out of their real estate deal because of the dissension in the younger partners.
So it can hinder growth.
Yeah.
And it can, create disproportionate sort of advantage.
So, and I think owning and managing real estate really distracts from a company's primary purpose, and an awful lot of time gets eaten up with that. When I think back on 39 Forest Avenue, the amount of time that we spent worrying and sorting that out was really not productive.
So perhaps ownership, that's more of an asset of the company as opposed to just a few principles.
If you're going to own real estate as a company,
being confident in the performance of the building, if that's something you decided to do, with at least regards to the tenant base, something that you understand and are able to manage is important as well.
Yeah, I think we would have been way better off if we hadn't sort of had eyes bigger than our stomach in terms of biting off a huge building, which we couldn't even come close to fully occupying.
Right.
Well, in a down
market.
A very volatile market, of course. So, touching on the move to the Eastern Waterfront, 144 4th Street, which I always thought was a very hard address for me to say.
Yeah.
There's also a 444 4th Street, by the way. So, that area of town, what was it, maybe late 1990s or right around 2000?
1994, I think.
Okay, all right, even earlier than that. So that was a very different area of Portland. What kind of led you to that neighborhood at the time?
I think two things. One was that we needed to get out of the 39 Forest Avenue. Once we've solved the real estate problem, we needed to get out of there quickly. And so we needed to find a place to go quickly. As a growing architectural firm, we also needed to find some place that was inexpensive, and I think
and had parking.
And had parking.
So even back then, parking was becoming an issue.
It was, and there was just tons of parking there. We had to do. There was no office entrance on the water side of that building. It had been occupied a few years before by IDEX, and then it had been rented to the Navy, who was had a dry dock on the waterfront.
Right.
And so we went in and took over the Navy's lease from IDEX to start with, and then ended up renting from Mike Marino, who owned the building when that deal was up. But obviously the rent was attractive. I was looking to find a place quickly. Looking back in those days, you looked at the newspaper to find space for rent. Right. And it was advertised as warehouse space for $4 a square foot. And I said, that's for us.
Yep.
And so Tony McDonald from the Boulos Company was the listed broker on the ad, and I called Tony, and we were there 25 years.
Wow. And when the company located there, there weren't any other really office users. I mean, it was mostly warehouse space, right?
Yeah,
Were
the
the
building.
trains
Fringe.
were the trains still active at that time in that location, or was it mostly the
No,
the
I think the
Navy dry
trains were
dock
gone by
traffic?
then.
Yep.
But it was a repurposed beer warehouse.
Yep.
I think it was National Distributors Beer Warehouse.
And there was the taxi company.
Right.
Right.
It was a
Yeah.
taxi depot.
Yeah, the Yellow Cab had their huge taxi depot there and repair facility there
Right.
as part of the building, which we eventually took over.
Right. So in that home for 25 years, you saw that area go from a Navy dry dock to what it is today, which
Right.
is hotels and the new WEX office headquarters
Yeah.
and $1 million condo, more than $3 million condos. How did that evolution seem to you? Did it all happen very quickly in the last 5 years, or is this really an evolution that started immediately when you got there?
It didn't start immediately. There was a good 5-8 years where not much was happening. But then, then it sort of took off.
Right. There was the addition of the Bayside Trail. Right?
Yeah,
and that
the
started bringing
trail
different
was a
traffic.
catalyst. I mean, remember the old Village restaurant?
Yeah. Yes.
So aggregating some of these properties. There was the Jordan
Yep.
meat company was still down there. They were still, making hot dogs. You could smell them. There was, basically it was an industrial
Beer and hot dogs.
beer and
Yeah,
hot
right.
dogs
Yep.
and that big restaurant.
Yeah.
And so there was a huge fire at the Jordan Meat Company. I don't know if you remember that,
Yep.
but
Yep.
and after that property moved to
Yep.
its hotel. Well, eventually to its
Yeah,
hotel.
it started
use.
on that site and then moved east.
Yep.
Right.
Boom,
And
boom,
it's
boom.
Kind
Yeah.
of just been block by
Yeah, block
block
by block. Yeah.
over time, and now is some would even argue is getting close to completion in terms of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know there was a Eastern Waterfront master plan, right, that was done in the early 2000s, and looking at that back then, probably saying like, yeah, right, when's that going to happen?
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, but now it's like street canyons with 5-6-story buildings
yeah,
lining the streets. And when we moved down there, it was basically pretty wide open with large parking lots and a few 1- or 2-story buildings.
Sure.
So completely changed the landscape.
yeah. And I mean, as architects and business leaders in this city, what are your thoughts on that development? I mean, I think what's there now is probably better than what was there when you first moved in. What do you think about the general aesthetic and just the way that it's laid out and what it adds to the city?
That's kind of a tough question because I think some of the design is okay. Some of it, frankly, I think is awful, and I won't cite which one is okay and which one is awful. I mean, one of the things that worries me a little bit about what's been built down there, and it is all developer, it's all developer developed, and rather than owner developed. And I think that the thing that concerns me is that I think those buildings are not terribly sustainable buildings in the long term, and not designed to be sustainable.
And now our imperative is energy optimization. I mean,
Right.
it is. I mean, we think of it constantly.
And that's what your
The
clients
heat-
are asking
It's what
Yes.
our clients
Oh.
are asking for. It's the right thing to do. It's the environmental stewardship that we practice, and that was not the eye to a lot of that development.
Right. I mean, even, first glance, you think of rising sea levels in that area and maybe even some of the Bayside areas.
Correct. Right.
And I know there was a study recently done with that, but obviously that's some of the concern as well. And
Absolutely.
50 to 100 years.
In our 25 years down in that 144 4th Street building, our parking lot would flood. The water would come through the door. I mean, it is ripe for concern
Yep.
with sea level.
Yep. So maybe that's the answer to this next question, but you're in the middle of one of the hottest real estate markets in all of Portland, in a building that you've been in for 25 years, and you just recently relocated out of that building. What was the reason for the move? You had parking right out front of the building. What were some of the reasons for the relocation, which is that now 75 Washington Avenue, the old Nissan building?
First of all, we have Nate to thank for our 75 Washington Avenue occupancy, because when we got the call from Nate saying, I think we got something for you, we were like over there that afternoon, and it was just
Yeah.
walked in and we knew that was it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Sure.
But our lease was running out. There was no longer the abundant parking we thought that we originally had.
Right.
So
As the rest of the neighborhood developed
as
around
the rest
you.
of the neighborhood
Yeah.
developed around us, and it was evident that the building we were in was not a building of significance, and it would eventually probably be torn down and something
Yeah.
of higher value would go there. So we did not want to up a lease for any long term.
Mhm.
And we wanted to position the firm for, a sustained presence for, 10, 20 years in a
Right.
new location. So it was clearly time to move.
Yep.
And we also wanted to upgrade our space. Our employees deserved better quality space.
Right.
And so this was an upgrade of the work environment.
Yep.
And, the environment that you work in impacts your productivity. And
Definitely.
we know that there's a direct relationship there.
Yep.
And it was time to invest in ourselves.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, when we looked at a lot of spaces around town, and Bayside, and I mean, I think I even put 39 Forest Avenue back in front of you. Sorry.
Yeah, that was a non-starter.
No way.
So, and I remember that property at Washington Avenue was off market,
Right.
And actually was for sale, and based on the history, weren't interested in purchasing real estate, and that was a great example of it's great to work with architects who have a vision, because that space was just, you could tell it had amazing ceiling height. I mean, what are 18-foot ceilings with these tiny little offices built out everywhere, and I think due to COVID, I haven't been able to see the finished product, but I think probably one of the more amazing spaces in Portland at this
It is.
time. So that was a great job with that
Yeah.
space.
It is.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think maybe for some of your employees, they haven't been able to enjoy that space
Yeah.
in the last 12 months just due to COVID and the work from home. So how has that impacted the way that you've occupied that space?
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
because that hit almost
It
right
did.
when
It
you're
hit.
moving in.
So basically, March in March 2020, we were completing the construction. We
Mhm.
were scheduling the move. We were packing, and then shut the office down, and everybody worked from home for a year.
Right.
And
Well,
so
at the time, it was only 3 weeks, remember?
it was only
Yeah.
3 weeks. That's right.
Yeah.
But so we pivoted, and hugely proud of our team.
Mhm.
I mean, we really didn't skip a beat. We were serving our clients the next day. We
Yep.
adapted to the new technology. We figured out Teams calls and Zoom calls, and we really kept the ongoing business humming.
Yeah.
So that was not an issue, but it's building the social connections.
Mhm.
It's all the things you get from going to work, and the casual conversations and the mentoring and the catching something where you can really affect change by, sketching something, on someone's desk. That doesn't happen on
Yeah.
the Zoom call. So we've really adapted to new tools and new ways of working, and our clients have adapted with us.
Yep.
But we are really looking forward to everyone being able to be back
Yep.
together. It's for some time, it will probably remain voluntary.
Sure.
People coming
course.
in,
Yep.
we'll get through the summer and see how things look in the fall.
Yep.
But the folks who have had the opportunity to spend time in the office, they're blown away by it.
Right.
They
Yeah.
just love it. And the office makes you want to come back.
Yeah.
And in the summer,
Yep.
it's air conditioned, and many homes aren't. I think people will choose
True.
the office.
Especially the last couple of days. It's a very
Yeah.
good point. And it's a creative office.
Yes.
It's obviously built to foster creativity, but that also means that it's mostly an open layout. I mean, what are there, 3 private offices?
Yeah, that's
in
it.
the whole space. So
Yeah.
not necessarily COVID friendly, but you've kind of mentioned some of the adjustments that you've made as an office occupier. Do you think some of those trends or adjustments you've had to make are trends that we're going to see continuing into the future? I mean, just 9
Yeah.
months ago, people were saying the office building is dead.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, the office building is not dead.
Yeah.
There is huge value in coming together to do hard work together. I do think we're going to see a hybrid. We're going to see people spending a portion of their time elsewhere, not necessarily
Sure.
home, but in another space.
Mhm.
But I think there will be a need for organizations to provide a home for their employees, to
Yep.
build culture, to build collaboration, to mentor, to coach,
Yep.
and to manage the workflows. There are some workflows that work better if you're face to face. There's some
Yep.
workflows that actually work better if you have heads down time.
Right.
So what we want to do is pick the places people have to work
Yep.
to match the workflow, but also match the need of the company.
Right.
So it's not just one or the other. So if you balance employee wants and needs, the company wants and needs, and then match that to the workflow.
Yep.
And it's not an all or nothing.
Right. Right. I read a quote recently that said, we've all proven we can be efficient answering emails from our couch, but it's the collaborative space where you come together and work
Correct.
together that we've really been missing.
Yeah.
And we ran a survey, an occupier survey this past fall, and that was, the gist that we got from it is that, look, everyone's being efficient and employees are doing their job, and there's this level of trust that's paying off. But what we're really missing is this just efficiency of communication, those casual conversations on the way to the coffee pot, and even, you said mentoring. And if you're a 25-year-old trying to grow in a company,
Exactly.
it's hard to be seen if you're not in the office
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah, I heard it described as we have this bank account of relationships that we built pre-COVID,
Yep.
and we're kind of using it up.
Oh, interesting.
And you
Sure.
gotta refill it.
Yep.
And yeah, it's easy for me to work with the people I already knew pre-COVID, but people who have joined since then, I don't really know them that well because I haven't had that opportunity to interact.
Yep. And that's
And
very
so,
important for especially your line of business.
Exactly.
You're working together as a team and collaborating.
Yep.
So getting to know your employees is obviously important. So this is, specific to your industry. What, with some of your clients who are, reassessing maybe their
Yes.
office layouts
Yes.
is, I think once again, 6 months ago, everyone's saying, oh, well, we're going back to the private office. Everyone wants a private office. But if we're using spaces more as meeting spaces and collaborative spaces, what does that mean for your clients?
Yeah.
What are they saying?
No, especially our corporate office clients,
Right.
we're saying definitely hybrid and definitely more choices.
Right.
So maybe open workstations, but more huddle rooms, more room I can duck into for a video call or for a private call with the doctor. More of these selectively used private spaces, but many of them and many choices of small group, medium group, large group, open collaboration, closed collaboration, formal meeting rooms, informal, I think we're gonna see the office as the magnet. The reason you go into the office is for a meeting or, and so we need more of those types of spaces that bring people together.
Yep. Interesting. Yeah. Some of the business leaders I've been speaking to, some are sensitive to their employees returning, as sounds you are as well. Some are not. But those that are sensitive are thinking of ways like we need to entice our employees to come back.
And
we're not going to force them. How do we entice them to come back?
We're actually thinking of it as providing the magnet amenities.
Yep.
So what is it that's going to draw people into the office? Because it will, the company will advance and they as individuals will advance.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I don't think enticing people back is as easy as it used to be with a ping pong table and a pool table, right?
No.
So what I love about your new space is that you have these huge windows that overlook the entire city of Portland. And this is my segue into Portland in general. You can really see the whole growth of that city from those windows. And even from when you started in the company, from what you've seen in Portland, and you've seen it grow over the years. Where do you see Portland going in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of emphasis right now in terms of trying to turn Portland into what the Portland Society for Architecture has said as a complete city, which makes a home for everybody. And I think, and you can see this in the politics today, there's a lot of concern that the city of Portland has turned into a place that isn't a complete city and that isn't a place for everybody, where everybody can live and work. The city has changed enormously since I came back here, and certainly when I left high school to go to college, most of the kids in my class, nobody was going to come back to Portland because there was nothing going on here. I mean, and that's a reason that if I told my dad I'd come back and help him finish that project, and then I was out of here,
right?
Because there literally was not much of anything happening back in the 60s here.
Right, especially in the downtown area, right?
Right.
I mean, a lot of those buildings on Commercial Street and Exchange Street were vacant.
Well, and look at what Elizabeth Noyce did for Congress Street. That was kind of the beginning, I think, of the turnaround in Portland in terms of companies realizing that there was good real estate to occupy in downtown.
And she was proactively purchasing vacant, dilapidated buildings, putting the money into them without any tenant in hand, to help facilitate.
I mean, that was a
change.
game
Yeah,
changer
that
for the
was a
city,
game
in my
changer.
opinion.
Yep. And was that the late 80s, early 90s?
I think so, late 80s probably, I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But she bought some wonderful buildings, which who knows what would have happened to them without that. I mean, they could have ended up being torn down.
Right. I think one of the buildings that they renovated, which I think of because we're going through another major renovation
Right.
now, is 465
Right.
Congress
Right.
Street, the Fidelity Building, or
Yeah.
Main Bank and Trust Building.
Right.
Yeah,
whatever
whatever
you
you
The
call it.
Fidelity
call it.
building, yeah.
That who knows where that would be today.
Right.
So you had mentioned no one wanted to come back to Portland. You're a graduating high school class.
Right.
So, obviously that is a concern that I've heard from many major employers in Portland, is attracting young talent. Even now, into the wonderful city that Portland has become, it's still only 65,000 people. So is that a concern of SMRT, or how do you go about attracting young talent to the Portland area?
Yeah, no.
from outside the state?
Talent, and the right talent is a huge
Yep.
issue. And one of the reasons we're so proud of our new space is it is a recruitment tool.
Mhm.
There is no doubt. You walk into that space, it's humming.
Right.
I mean, and it's a beautiful place to work, and it will make a difference.
Yep.
But we know that Maine is short on knowledge workers, and you see the work that University of Southern Maine, the Rue Institute, University of Maine are doing to create the knowledge workers of the future.
Yep.
And that's what we need to grow a vibrant economy.
Right.
Yeah, I think if people go to school here, they also tend to stay here, I think. But it is no question about it. It's very difficult and has been very difficult for us to recruit talent. And the other piece of that is that as diverse a firm as we can be here, but it's difficult attracting a diverse workforce in Portland, Maine, and that's something that that we want very much to do.
Yeah. You mentioned some of those major players. I really think those are going to be a game changer when we look
Totally agree.
back 5 years from now or 10 years from now in terms of keeping that talent here locally.
Exactly.
Right.
I think
Another
will
exciting
really be
move
great.
is the University of New England, their medical school is moving to Portland
Right. Yes.
from Biddeford. So, I mean, that's another investment in the city of Portland, which makes so much sense.
Right. There seemed to be this general move to the suburbs with a lot of these institutional and education uses, and it's almost like it's coming back to Portland.
Yeah.
And I think we could get into a whole issue of, where these people live in
Right.
downtown Portland.
Huge issue.
And that's a whole other podcast episode. But where do you see, you have offices elsewhere
Yes.
in SMRT. Where are the other offices located?
So we have staff and offices in Bangor,
Yep.
Andover, Massachusetts, and Schenectady, New York.
Right. And so where do you see the future of the company moving? Additional locations, or really focusing on those areas and building those branches?
Yeah, the short distance view is that we can grow where we are, so that we have room for growth in Schenectady, we have room for growth in Andover. We actually have room for growth without expanding our footprint.
Gotcha.
And it's getting easier and easier. I mean, COVID taught us all that we can work remotely. So we can, and we're servicing clients in Georgia. We're servicing, clients that are California, outside of our staffed footprint areas.
Yep.
Pretty effectively.
Interesting.
So we may say, let's grow where we have our physical footprints now for the foreseeable future. But it's about the talent. It's where is the talent? Where do we need to locate our offices so that
Interesting.
talent is available? And again, remote is our friend because we are able to have people who are not physically, boots on the ground all the time. We have one employee who's able to spend time in the Dominican and time in Portland, and it works.
Wow.
So it expands where we can, where our staff can, put their head on the pillow at night.
Right.
Does not have to be in the proximity of one of our staffed offices. So that's a game changer.
And that allows for growth of the company, as you mentioned, without expanding your footprint.
Yep.
And maybe even makes that a little easier to plan for the future, because you can grow not for just the sake of growth, but for growing around the talent.
Yes, strategic imperative for growth, rather than we just need another place to put someone.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And who knows what that office environment will look like 150 years from now, when SMRT is still around.
Still around. We'll still be here.
Yeah. We can all celebrate the 300th
That's right.
anniversary.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
right. I'll be here.
Well, good. So it's been a pleasure talking with both of you today. I think that wraps up my interview. I didn't know if there were anything you wanted to share with regards to SMRT that I didn't touch on or anything of that nature.
I don't think so. I mean, we're a growing, thriving company. I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is Ellen, and that we have a huge number of women employees in senior positions. And when I started in this business in Maine, there was one female registered architect in the state of Maine.
State.
And then the second person was a young lady that worked in our office. And now, I don't know what the percentage of women architects and engineers in our office is, but it's considerable number of employees. It's probably 35-40% of our employees, I would think.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Was
And
that
it's
intentional?
Historically been yes, and historically been a profession that women didn't go into, architecture and engineering.
And how's that changed with from the leadership side or the architecture industry in general? I mean, some of the most famous architects in the world now are women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
No, there's been a shift in the industry, and
Yeah.
I would have to say, working for all the years that I have with Paul, there was never a barrier because I was a woman. I mean, in fact, there was probably opportunity
Yep.
because I was a woman, just because of Paul's approach to the world is so
Right.
inclusive.
interesting.
And so it was never like I'm pushing up against something or I'm not able to do something.
Right.
It was more like throw something huge at me and
Figure it out.
run.
And she did.
Well, that's great. That's a great story. Okay. Well, thank you
Great.
both for
Thank you.
being here.
Yep.
It was really great. Two special guests, Ellen Belknap and Paul Stevens, my dad with SMRT. So that concludes today's episode of the Boulos Beat. Thank you to our guests for joining us. If you'd like to know more about the Boulos Company, please visit us at www.boulos.com. You can find additional information on Facebook, LinkedIn, and the Boulos Company at Instagram and Twitter. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe on YouTube so you'll be the first to know about future episodes. So thank you for joining us today.